One woman broke every rule to protect a soldier, but it was the dog who refused to let the world forget. In a dusty village deep in Central America, where sirens blended with silence and danger came without warning, a wounded Marine lay helpless in a field hospital. No one saw the blade before it struck. But she did. And when she fell, it wasn't a doctor or a guard who cried first. It was the dog. A K9 left behind by war, a nurse scarred by duty, and a young soldier caught between violence and mercy. This is the story of a sacrifice nearly erased, and the loyalty that brought 100 silent guardians to her door. The rain had been falling for 15 hours without pause. In the mist-veiled hills outside Tegucigalpa, Honduras, the muddy trails had turned into rivers of red-brown sludge, and the sky roared with a violence that never seemed to end. Thunder cracked across the mountains like artillery, and wind lashed against the canvas walls of the temporary field hospital, stationed on a former school compound. The night outside was wild and unforgiving, but the true storm was about to break within. Inside the ER unit, fluorescent lights flickered above rusted IV poles and mismatched cots. Plastic curtains rippled in the breeze, sneaking through the cracked windows, and the sharp scent of bleach struggled against the sweat and damp of too many bodies. A skeleton staff moved like ghosts from bed to bed, tending to civilians and soldiers alike. This place had no boundaries for pain. Sarah Jenkins adjusted the surgical gloves on her hands as she entered Bay 3. She had the kind of poise that didn't belong in a war zone. Tall and slim, hair a pale blonde twist tucked beneath a scrub cap, with a face that rarely betrayed fatigue, though her body had known too many sleepless nights. Her skin was sun-brushed and freckled at the cheeks, and her eyes, ice blue and steady, had seen enough wounds to read a patient's fear before they ever spoke. At 34, she was past illusions, but not past compassion. Years working in humanitarian missions had hardened her hands, not her heart. She glanced at the incoming stretcher as it was wheeled in, splashing the floor with trail mud. The young soldier on it winced, but didn't cry out. His right arm was cradled in a tight sling, the shoulder soaked with blood but drying fast. His dark brown hair clung to his forehead in wet curls, and a faint trail of freckles crossed the bridge of his nose. He couldn't have been more than 24. Corporal Marcus Thorne, the transport medic announced. Motorbike IED outside Talanga. Broken arm, possible rib fractures. Conscious, responsive. Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm and even. You're safe, Corporal. Let's get you checked. Marcus tried to sit up straighter despite the pain. Ma'am, he said, teeth gritted, permission to keep my partner nearby. That's when the low growl rolled through the room. A soaked Marine entered behind the stretcher, holding a taut leash. At the end of it strode a large German shepherd, muscular, soaked to the bone, and completely alert. His eyes were a burning amber, fur a deep mix of sable and ash gray. His left ear was notched. Scar tissue there told its own story, and his posture was rigid, unshaken by the chaos of the ER. This is Rex, Marcus said quickly. He's my K9 partner, trained for patrol and protection. He's earned his place. Sarah glanced at the dog, who had fixed his gaze on her. He didn't growl again, but his eyes narrowed, calculating. She held his stare for a second, then nodded. He stays, she said. But if he bites a nurse, he's getting a muzzle. He only bites bad guys, Marcus muttered. Rex gave a sharp snort, as if in agreement, and settled on the floor by Marcus's side, chest rising and falling like a coiled spring. As Sarah worked, cleaning the wound and adjusting the sling, Marcus answered her questions with precision. He was respectful, but not stiff. Underneath the discipline was a quiet sense of humor, the kind that surfaced only when death wasn't too far away. Sarah liked that. The ones who joked in pain were usually the ones still fighting. Outside, the wind shrieked against the tin roof. Inside, the generator coughed and flickered once, then caught. Lights buzzed back to life. From the next bay over, a curtain rustled. The man who walked in wasn't on any of the intake logs. Medium build, soaked to the bone, unshaven. His eyes were glassy and wide, his hands shaking. But it wasn't fear. It was something colder, detached. His hospital gown hung awkwardly as though he'd refused proper dressings. One arm was bandaged badly, dripping blood through the cloth. Sarah's eyes narrowed. She gestured for another nurse. Who triaged him? Came in 5 minutes ago. Said he was stabbed during a robbery, the nurse whispered. Slight wound. We put him in Bay 4. He wasn't supposed to be walking, and certainly not this close to the military zone. Rex stood. It was a silent, chilling motion. His ears perked, body locked forward, eyes pinned on the man. "Sir," Sarah said, stepping in front of Marcus instinctively, "you need to return to your bay. We'll have someone take care of that arm." The man didn't speak. He moved. It wasn't a run, not exactly. A lurch, sudden and violent, like a puppet cut from its strings then reanimated. His arm came up. In his fist gleamed something metallic, rough and jagged, like a sharpened screwdriver. Not military-issued, homemade, brutal. There was no shout, no threat, only motion. Sarah didn't think. She moved. Her shoulder hit the side of Marcus's gurney as she shoved him hard, her body twisting to place herself between the blade and the boy. The first impact was a cold, electric shock that tore through her right shoulder. She gasped, but didn't fall. The second punch of steel hit her ribs, just below the lung. The air left her in a hiss. She heard Marcus scream. Maybe it was Rex. The blade came again. Sarah turned her back, arms still shielding Marcus's head. A third stab, this time to her spine. Everything blurred. Rex lunged. The leash snapped. Teeth tore into flesh, not hers. The attacker shrieked, a wet animal sound that was silenced by the weight of 90 pounds of trained fury. Blood splattered. Alarms rang. Shouts rose. Sarah's knees buckled. Her vision swam. The floor rose to meet her. The last thing she saw was Rex, standing over Marcus, fur bristling, eyes blazing toward the door. The last thing she felt was warmth leaving her body, fast. And the last thought in her mind, oddly, was her father's voice. You protect who you can, however you can. Then the dark took her. The first thing she felt was fire. It bloomed in her side like a flare, searing through her ribs, radiating outward until it gripped her spine and shoulder like iron shackles. The second thing was weight, her own, pressing into the mattress beneath her as if her body had become an anchor trying to sink through the bed. Then sound returned. Not voices, not words, beeping. Steady, slow, the rhythmic tone of a heart monitor counting out seconds she had no memory of earning. Sarah Jenkins opened her eyes to the blurred haze of a hospital ceiling. The lights above her were dimmed, yet they stabbed at her vision like needles. Her mouth was dry, her lips cracked. Every breath was a raw negotiation between her lungs and the wounds that encircled them. She tried to speak, but only managed a rasp of air. A soft buzz came from her right, and a nurse in her 20s appeared, Latina, hair tied into a long braid, kind eyes beneath thick-rimmed glasses. Her name tag read, Elena Ruiz. She was quick but gentle, moving with the practiced grace of someone who'd done this too many times, too young. "You're awake," Elena said, voice warm but tinged with relief. "You've been under for 2 days. You're at the military ICU unit outside Tegucigalpa." Sarah tried to move, and a bolt of agony lanced through her torso. She flinched, choking on the pain. "Easy," Elena warned. "You took 7 stab wounds. 2 came dangerously close to your lungs. 1 punctured it partially. The others, back, side, shoulder. You lost a lot of blood. They didn't think you'd make it through the first night." Sarah didn't speak. She was trying to piece together the fragments, the noise, the cold metal, the blur of pain, and then Marcus. Rex. Her eyes fluttered with panic. "The Marine, Thorne, is he alive?" "Yes," Elena said, nodding. "He's back at the base now. Minor fractures. He kept asking for you." Sarah exhaled slowly. It hurt, but it was a good hurt. "Rex?" she whispered. The nurse's expression shifted slightly, the corner of her mouth lifting. "The dog. He hasn't left. He's been lying outside your door. No one can get near you without him growling. He's very determined." That was Rex. She had seen it in his eyes even before the attack. That readiness, that understanding, that unshakable loyalty that went beyond training. She wondered if they'd let him in. Just for a moment. She needed to see him. She needed to know someone still stood guard. But instead of Rex, someone else entered her room. The door opened with a soft hiss, and a man stepped in, dressed not in hospital scrubs or military fatigues, but in a crumpled gray suit. His shoes were damp from the rain, his coat smelled faintly of old coffee and tobacco, and his presence carried the weight of paper and consequence. "Miss Jenkins," he said without waiting for acknowledgement. "Detective Randall Miller, local liaison for international medical incidents." He was in his late 40s, with sharp cheekbones, thinning dark hair combed back, and a jawline that hadn't seen a razor in 2 days. His eyes were pale gray, unreadable, his mouth set in a neutral line. He didn't carry warmth, only process. This was a man who lived by forms, timelines, and carefully maintained detachment. Sarah blinked slowly, bracing for more pain. "I need a few moments of your time," Miller said, already pulling a notebook from the inner pocket of his jacket. "This won't take long. It concerns the incident 2 nights ago. We're reviewing conduct within the humanitarian deployment protocols." Elena stiffened. "She just woke up. Maybe wait." Miller didn't look at her. "Protocol requires an initial interview within 48 hours of a violent incident. It's not optional." Sarah raised a trembling hand. "It's okay," she murmured. "Let's just get it over with." Miller opened his notebook, pen poised. "You were assigned to Bay 3. Your patient was Corporal Marcus Thorne, yes?" She nodded. "Describe what occurred." She swallowed. "He'd just come in. Broken arm. I was wrapping his shoulder. Then a man, he wasn't on my chart, came in from the next bay. He lunged. No warning. Just moved. You moved to shield the patient?" Miller interjected, scribbling. "Yes." "Did you notify security beforehand, press a panic button, issue a verbal command?" Sarah blinked, the absurdity slowly settling. "There wasn't time." "Did you attempt to engage the attacker verbally before making contact?" "He had a weapon. There was no time. I moved. That's it." Miller didn't nod or react. He merely wrote. "And the K9, Rex, engaged as well?" "Yes. After I was stabbed. He intervened. Saved us both." Miller paused, then flipped the page. "The report from hospital administration indicates that your actions may constitute a violation of Rule 7.3. Personnel shall not physically engage threats unless under explicit directive from on-site security." Sarah stared at him. Her voice, when it came, was low and hollow. "So I should have just let him die?" Miller's expression didn't change. "I'm not here to debate philosophy, Miss Jenkins, only to document events." He tore the page, tucked it neatly into a file, then pulled a business card from his wallet and set it on the tray beside her water cup. "We may require follow-up. You'll be informed. Rest well." He turned and left. The silence that followed was louder than the storm outside. Elena stepped forward, eyes filled with something close to fury. "Don't listen to that! You saved a life!" Sarah didn't reply. Her hands trembled, not from pain, but from something worse, a crack spreading beneath everything she'd believed. Elena left to fetch medication. The room dimmed. That's when she heard it, a low whine from the hallway. Then the familiar rhythmic click of nails on tile. The door cracked open, just a few inches. And there he was. Rex. He stood framed in the light, head low, tail still, his amber eyes locked on hers. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just watched her. Sarah's throat tightened. "You stubborn boy," she whispered. Rex padded slowly to her side, lowered his massive body beside the bed, and rested his head on the floor. He let out a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all the nights she'd been unconscious. His flank rose and fell with quiet breath. No doctor had allowed this. No one had opened the door for him. But Rex had come anyway, and for the first time since waking up, Sarah didn't feel alone. The rain had stopped, but the sky above Tegucigalpa still hung heavy with unfinished grief. Gray clouds hovered like unspoken accusations, and the wind dragged old plastic bags through the narrow alleys like whispers of something forgotten. In the low hills on the city's outskirts, far from the hum of government buildings or embassies, a quiet street held a 2-room rental house painted a faded shade of mint. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, the kind of place people passed by without really seeing. Sarah Jenkins now called it home. She moved slowly, her posture still stiff with pain. Bandages wrapped her torso beneath her plain cotton shirt, and every movement felt like her skin was stitched with wire. The long cardigan she wore did little to disguise her limp or the bruises that bloomed beneath her collarbone. Her pale blonde hair had lost its luster, tied loosely back as if she no longer had the strength or the reason to care how she looked. Her face was thinner than before the stabbing, the cheekbones sharp now, eyes sunken with sleepless nights. But there was no weakness in her stare, only fatigue, the kind that didn't go away with rest. The inside of the house was sparse, clean but impersonal. One folding table, one chair. A cot in the corner where a mattress lay on the floor, next to a stack of unpaid bills and a small tarnished metal box that held her father's dog tags and two faded photographs. One of him in uniform, one of her at age 8, grinning with a front tooth missing. On the kitchen counter, a red envelope screamed "Final Notice" in block letters. It sat atop a pile of hospital bills, each one thicker and more demanding than the last. The Workers' Compensation Board had yet to process her claim. Her bank account had just dipped below $90. Her rent was 5 days overdue. The landlord, a broad-shouldered man named Ortiz with deep lines around his eyes and a voice like gravel, had already knocked once that morning. "I like you, Miss Jenkins," he had said, shifting uncomfortably in the rain, "but I have a mortgage too." Sarah had nodded. "I understand." And she did. She understood all of it. The system didn't reward silence. It fed on it. The longer she waited for some apology, some explanation from the hospital, the more invisible she became. She hadn't heard from Marcus. Not a letter, not a word. She hadn't expected him to write. He was probably back in the field doing what soldiers do. But some part of her, the human part that still clung to connection, had hoped. Even a sentence would have done. Even a thank you. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was the echo inside it. That night, as dusk settled in, Sarah turned off the last light and curled up on the mattress. The pain medication had worn off hours ago, but she didn't take another. The ache in her ribs reminded her that she was still here, still fighting. She watched the shadows stretch across the walls. The city beyond her window hummed with motorbikes and distant shouting. Somewhere, a dog barked. She closed her eyes, and then she heard it. A single scratch at the door. Then again, more urgent this time, and a low, familiar huff. Sarah sat up, startled. Her body protested the sudden movement, but she pushed through it and made her way to the door. When she opened it, the porch light flickered once and bathed the steps in a dull amber glow. There, covered in mud, rain-matted fur clinging to a lean, muscular frame, stood Rex. The German shepherd was soaked, paws caked with red dirt. His left ear twitched once at the sight of her, and his tail gave a single slow sweep. His amber eyes didn't shine with joy or excitement, just unwavering focus, steadfast, present. Sarah stared at him for a moment, disbelief catching in her throat. "Rex!" He took one step forward and then sat, right there on the top step, as if this was where he belonged. As if he had traveled through every checkpoint and fence and locked door in Honduras just to reach her. Sarah dropped to her knees, the pain ignored. Her hands, trembling, reached for his fur. It was cold and matted, but he leaned into her touch. No sound escaped her lips, just a choked breath. "How did you find me?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Of course he didn't. But his presence filled the void like no apology ever could. She pulled him close, burying her face in his neck, and for the first time since the stabbing, she cried. Not from pain, not from fear, but from the simple, overwhelming relief of being remembered. He didn't try to enter. He didn't demand anything. He simply curled up on the welcome mat, facing the street, his body between her and the world. That night, Sarah didn't sleep much. She left the door slightly ajar so Rex could come in if he wished, but he didn't. He stayed on guard, watching. At one point, she got up, pulled a threadbare blanket from the bed, and gently draped it over him. He didn't stir. His ears stayed up. When the sun rose, Rex was still there, still dry-eyed and unblinking. Like a soldier. The barracks at Camp Lejeune's Honduran outpost were always quiet just after dawn, but today, the silence felt like something deeper, something held. Corporal Marcus Thorne sat on the edge of his bunk, his right arm still wrapped tight in a pale green sling. The injury no longer throbbed, but the weight of frustration bore down heavier than any broken bone. He was tall and broad-shouldered, the lean musculature of someone used to hauling gear through impossible terrain. His freckled skin had tanned further under the Honduran sun, and though his jaw remained clean-shaven, tension lived in every line of his face. His brown eyes, normally steady, flickered now with barely concealed anger. Days had passed since he was discharged from the field hospital, yet no one at command would answer his questions about the nurse who had shielded him from a blade meant for his heart. Sarah Jenkins. He had asked for her twice, first in the ICU, then again through medical dispatch. The first time, they told him she was stable. The second time, they told him to stop asking. Then came the briefing report, thinly veiled PR language printed in cold, bureaucratic font. He read it 3 times before tearing it in half. Medical staff member intervened in an unauthorized capacity during a security incident, resulting in injury. While the Marine's life was preserved, disciplinary procedures are ongoing regarding failure to follow hospital protocol. They had called her unauthorized. He leaned forward now, bracing his good hand on his knee, breathing slow and deep. Rex lay on the floor at his feet, head resting between his paws, ears twitching slightly at the shift in Marcus's posture. The dog's coat was clean now, thanks to a field medic who owed Marcus a favor. But his eyes remained alert, still searching doorways, still waiting for something to be made right. Marcus stood. "We're done waiting." Rex lifted his head as Marcus stepped into his boots and adjusted the sling over his shoulder. He picked up a folder from the desk, the original incident report, marked with red annotations and his own notes. Then he opened the door. They crossed the base in silence. Soldiers saluted as he passed, though their eyes drifted toward Rex. The German shepherd walked with precision, close to Marcus's side, his gait confident, tail low. Every Marine on this base knew Rex. They knew he had bled for them more than once, and they had heard rumors, half-whispers of the nurse, the blade, the silence that followed. Marcus reached the operations wing and walked straight to the door at the end of the hall. A brass nameplate read, "Gunnery Sergeant Eva Rostova." He knocked once. A voice answered, clipped and sharp. "Enter." Marcus stepped in. Rex followed. The office was spotless, sparse. The walls were bare save for a single framed commendation and a faded map of Kandahar with red pins still stuck into certain corners. Behind the desk sat a woman in her late 40s, her posture so straight it looked carved. Eva Rostova had skin the color of espresso, short-cropped hair, and a face that had long since lost its softness. Her eyes, however, were her weapon. Dark, focused, and incapable of forgetting. She looked up from her laptop, appraising Marcus the way a sniper might judge wind speed, silent, exacting. "Corporal Thorne," she said, "you should be in recovery. I need to talk to you. I assumed the dog gave it away." Marcus stepped forward and placed the folder on her desk. "I'm here because the hospital is burying what happened." She didn't touch the folder. "I've read the report." "Not the truth." Rostova leaned back. "Tell it." So he did. From the moment Sarah met him in Bay 3 to the instant she threw herself in front of the blade. He told her about the attacker's face, the way Rex broke free, the sound of the knife hitting bone. He didn't spare himself. He spoke of how useless he had felt, how she shielded his body while he could do nothing. Then he described what happened after. The vague answers, the locked doors, the way no one mentioned her name again. Rex, as if understanding, stood and placed a paw gently on the folder. When Marcus finished, the room went still. Rostova's eyes didn't waver. "You're sure of this?" "Every second of it." "She protected you?" "Yes, Gunny, she saved me." Rostova stood. She was tall, nearly eye level with Marcus, and had the presence of someone used to leading from the front, not the rear. She crossed the room, then stared past Marcus's shoulder at the door, as if calculating the number of people she would have to move through to burn this entire thing to the ground. "In the field," she said quietly, "you don't check protocol before dragging someone out of enemy fire. You move. You save lives. That woman acted on instinct, and we call that cowardice." She turned back to Marcus. "Do you know where she is now?" He shook his head. "They've shut everything down. She's not answering. I don't even know if she's still in the country." Rostova walked back to her desk and pulled out a drawer. From it, she retrieved a slim black notebook. It was not regulation. It was old and well-worn, the edges curled from years of use. She flipped to a fresh page. "I'm calling in 3 favors," she said. "You didn't hear that. Neither did the dog." Marcus allowed himself the first smile in days. Rostova clicked her pen and began writing. Start by contacting Private Santoro in logistics. He used to drive supply routes between the hospitals. He might know where Jenkins is staying. Roger that. She glanced up. Ann Thorne? Yes, ma'am. You didn't come in here today to report a complaint. You came in here to start something. Yes, ma'am. Good, she said, because the system may forget her. But we don't. Not this uniform. Not this unit. She paused, her jaw tightening. No one abandons the woman who bled for my Marines, not on my watch. The morning light filtered through gray skies, bleeding into the worn windows of Sarah's rented house like a half-formed apology. It was barely past 6 a.m., and the stillness outside was uncanny. No motorcycles sputtering down the alley, no vendors shouting over clattering carts. Just quiet, the kind that pressed against the walls like something waiting to break. Inside, Sarah Jenkins sat at the small kitchen table, her back curved and her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. The coffee had long gone cold. She hadn't taken a sip. Her ribs ached with every breath, and the bruises that bloomed beneath her shirt felt deeper today. Not from the wounds, but from the weight of the letter that lay open on the table. An eviction notice, official, unmoving, printed with language that made her feel less than human. She would be out by Friday. Rex lay near the door, his head resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded but never fully asleep. He'd barely left her side since he arrived 2 nights ago. She'd tried to call the base to report his presence, but the only response had been silence, or worse, indifference. If he left the facility, he'll return, someone had said. But he hadn't. He was here. And she had grown used to the warmth of him, to the silent, vigilant companionship. Her fingers trembled as she folded the eviction letter, carefully, slowly, as if delaying the inevitable with ritual. She didn't know what she would do next. She didn't have anyone to call. She hadn't spoken to her mother in years. Her father was gone. Friends, distant. The hospital hadn't even sent flowers. A low sound tugged her from thought. Thump, thump, thump. Footsteps, slow, heavy, rhythmic. She turned her head, listening. Rex's ears snapped forward. The footsteps multiplied. A deliberate cadence, measured and exact, like a heartbeat forged from leather soles and military precision. Sarah stood, ignoring the sear of pain across her abdomen. She limped to the door, hand brushing the handle, unsure whether to open it or brace against it. Then she heard it again, this time closer. Thump, thump, halt. She opened the door, and her breath caught in her throat. Stretching down the narrow street, from her porch to the end of the block, stood a silent wall of deep blue dress uniforms. The U.S. Marine Corps, in full ceremonial attire, rows of men and women, young and old, dark and fair, stood shoulder to shoulder in immovable formation. Their jackets gleamed, white gloves pristine, metals sharp against their chests. Their caps cast long shadows, and not a single one of them looked away. At the front stood Gunnery Sergeant Eva Rostova. She was in full dress blues, her back straight, her short-cropped black hair perfectly in place. Her dark skin glowed in the muted morning light. Her expression was unreadable, neither stern nor soft. She stood as if made from iron, forged by battle and purpose. Next to her, slightly behind, was Marcus Thorne. He was still recovering, his arm in a more compact brace now, but he wore his uniform like armor. The freckled bridge of his nose was set in focus, and his brown eyes held steady against Sarah's gaze. And between them, Rex. The German shepherd stood tall, coat brushed, paws aligned. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He simply stared up at her, then walked forward. She stepped out onto the porch, stunned into silence. Rex reached her first, sat, and gently placed his paw into her open palm. Then came Marcus. He approached slowly, his movements careful, deliberate. In his good hand, he held a large white envelope, plain, unmarked. He offered it to her without a word at first. She took it with shaking fingers. "It's from the unit," he said quietly. "Everyone pitched in, for your rent, your bills, whatever you need." Sarah looked down at the envelope, then back up. "Marcus, He shook his head. "No speeches. You did what no one else would." Rostova stepped forward, her voice carried without volume. "We heard what the hospital said," she said. "We heard what they didn't say. But Marines don't forget. and we sure as hell don't leave anyone behind. From the windows of neighboring houses, curtains twitched. Neighbors peered out, men in undershirts, women in nightgowns, a child with tangled hair pressed to the glass. No one spoke. No one interrupted. They watched as Sarah stood on her porch, eyes wide, hand over her heart, surrounded by a silent army in blue. "This isn't for the press," Rostova added, her tone like tempered steel. "No cameras, no news vans, just us, just honor." Sarah couldn't speak. Her lips parted, but the words stayed trapped behind the swell in her chest. Her throat tightened. Her vision blurred. She looked at Marcus, then at Rex, then down the block. At dozens of faces she didn't know, but who had come here for her. Not because a memo told them to, because they remembered. Her knees nearly gave out. Marcus stepped forward, gently caught her elbow. "We'll stand here as long as it takes," he said, "until they remember who you are." Sarah nodded, too overwhelmed to do more, and behind her, for the first time since she was discharged, the door remained wide open. It began with a single clip, less than 30 seconds long, shot from a security camera in the trauma wing of the hospital. It showed what no press release ever had. A blur of motion, a nurse stepping in front of a lunging man, a flash of metal, then a sudden burst of movement. A German shepherd launching forward, teeth bared, intercepting the attacker. The angle caught the first strike, Sarah's body twisting, her arms pulling a young Marine beneath her. And then Rex barreling into frame, jaws clamped down on a swinging arm, dragging the assailant away. The footage was leaked by a junior IT technician named Luis Campos. Barely 22, with glasses too large for his narrow face and a conscience even bigger, he watched the hospital board's official statement on the evening news and couldn't sleep. He uploaded the video anonymously to an old Reddit account with the title, "This is what they're not telling you." By sunrise, it had over 200,000 views. By noon, it had passed 2 million. The hashtag #MarinesForSarah trended globally before dinner time. People weren't just watching, they were furious. Veterans groups reposted it with captions like, "That's not protocol, that's courage." Medical professionals weighed in, calling Sarah's response a textbook act of triage instinct. Dog lovers across the world flooded comment sections with images of their own K9S, tagging the account under a newly formed slogan, "He barked, we listened." Even more powerful than the footage was the silence that followed. The hospital didn't respond for a full 24 hours. Their inbox was flooded. Donors threatened withdrawal. One foundation in particular, the Henderson Family Trust, a multi-million-dollar contributor to military and humanitarian medical facilities, posted a statement to its official site. "We believe in duty. We believe in sacrifice. We are deeply disturbed by the treatment of Nurse Sarah Jenkins, and until full accountability is taken by the administration of St. Michael's Field Medical Unit, we are placing our financial commitments under review." The statement was signed and penned by Rebecca Henderson, a stern widow in her 70s with a reputation for quiet philanthropy and steel-spined loyalty to veterans. Her name alone shook the boardroom. Inside the hospital, panic bloomed. Executives who had once dismissed Sarah as a line item were now facing a public meltdown. Staff walked out. Nurses whispered her name in the break rooms. The same halls where Sarah had once been ignored now echoed with her legend. In a hastily arranged press conference, Dr. Calvin Morrissey, the hospital's director of operations, stepped up to the microphone. He was in his 50s, sharply dressed in a gray pinstripe suit, but sweat had begun to pool at the collar of his shirt. His graying temples were neatly combed, but his voice shook as the cameras went live. "We acknowledge serious failures in how Nurse Jenkins was treated," he read from the prepared statement, barely glancing up. "Effective immediately, her employment is reinstated with full back pay and benefits. Furthermore, she will be awarded the Cross of Civilian Valor, and her actions will be officially recorded and honored within our permanent archives." He cleared his throat. "We also recognize the bravery of K9 Unit Rex, whose intervention saved lives that night. A plaque in his honor will be installed in our Hall of Service under the designation K9 Valor, First Entry." Outside, the crowd that had gathered, a mix of military personnel, citizens, journalists, and medical workers, erupted into cheers. Sarah, watching from her living room, didn't cry. She sat on the couch, Rex curled up at her feet, and simply exhaled. It was a long breath, one she had held since the blade first tore through her shoulder. 2 days later, she stood at the back of an auditorium that had never meant to hold history. The ceremony took place at the Regional Operations Center near the base. Banners lined the walls, and chairs were filled with Marines in dress uniforms, hospital staff in polished whites, and civilians with badges on lanyards. The air smelled faintly of wax and pine cleaner. Sarah wore a dark navy dress, simple but elegant. Her hair, now trimmed neatly to shoulder length, was brushed smooth. Her pale skin still bore the subtle discoloration of bruises, and the faint scar beneath her collarbone peeked out when she turned too quickly. But she stood straight, not because she was healed, but because people needed to see that she hadn't stayed down. The MC introduced her name slowly. Sarah Jenkins, recipient of the Cross of Civilian Valor. Applause thundered through the room as she stepped toward the stage. She walked slowly, carefully. Every step carried months of pain and silence, every breath of a reminder of the price. But when she reached the center, when the medal was placed around her neck, she didn't look at the cameras. She looked into the front row. There, sitting perfectly still between Marcus and Rostova, was Rex. His coat gleamed under the lights, his body alert but relaxed. His ears perked slightly when her gaze met his. And then, just once, his tail gave a soft thump. Sarah smiled. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Photos, handshakes, press questions. Marcus leaned toward her once as they stood backstage, both in shadow. "They'll never forget this," he said quietly. "They shouldn't," she replied. Later, Sarah stood beside a new bronze plaque mounted in the hospital's hall of service. It bore 2 names: Sarah Jenkins, for unflinching courage under fire; Rex, canine valor, guardian without hesitation. A soft light shone on the engraved surface, catching her reflection just beside his. And for the first time, Sarah felt seen not for what she'd done, but for what she had always been. It was strange to be back. The building hadn't changed much. Same scuffed linoleum tiles stretching like faded rivers down long corridors. Same antiseptic tang in the air, sharp, medicinal, and oddly nostalgic. Same hum of fluorescent lights overhead, always slightly too bright, too sterile. But for Sarah Jenkins, walking through the entrance of St. Michael's Field Medical Unit no longer felt like returning to a battlefield. It felt like reclaiming ground she'd once bled for. She wore civilian clothes now, pressed gray slacks, a soft white blouse tucked neatly beneath a navy cardigan. Her gait was slower, careful, but confident. The long scar on her side, hidden beneath the fabric, pulled slightly with each step but no longer defined her. Her brown hair, now pulled back in a low bun, had grown since the last time she'd walked these halls. Her eyes, still sharp and steady, scanned every face she passed, not with suspicion, but with purpose. She paused outside the emergency response wing. Above the door, a new plaque gleamed under recessed lighting. In honor of courage, dedicated to the memory of what we endure to heal others. Below it, etched in bronze, were 2 names, Nurse Sarah Jenkins and K9 Rex. Sarah didn't linger. She knew that what came next mattered more than what had been carved in metal. Just inside, a young nurse stood wringing her hands near a trauma bay curtain. She couldn't have been more than 22. Short, with tightly coiled dark hair tucked beneath her cap, her eyes were wide and glassy with nerves. Her name tag read, M. Alvarez. Sarah approached softly, careful not to startle her. "First day?" The girl jumped slightly, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am, I mean, yes, first full shift," Alvarez stammered. "They just wheeled in a gunshot wound, and I've only done simulations. I thought I could, but..." Sarah didn't wait for her to finish. She stepped beside the young nurse and gently placed a hand on her back. "We'll go in together," she said. "You're not alone. I'm here." Alvarez's eyes widened in disbelief. Wait, are you the Sarah Jenkins?" Sarah smiled faintly. "I'm one of many. Let's go." As they stepped through the curtain, 2 doctors were already working on the patient. An older man with a gunshot to the thigh, stabilized, but pale. Sarah didn't touch a tool. She didn't need to. Her job now was something else. A few weeks prior, the Henderson Family Trust had met with the board privately. What came out of that meeting was unprecedented. A newly funded role titled Employee Safety and Advocacy Officer, created to provide trauma-informed support for staff, especially those involved in frontline emergencies. And Sarah was the first ever appointed to it. She wasn't here to check vitals anymore. She was here to make sure no one was forgotten. No one was left alone with their fear the way she had been. Outside the trauma bay, Rex waited. The German Shepherd had changed little in appearance, still a regal, muscular form with deep russet fur along his back and a black saddle pattern fading to cream at the legs. But something in his posture had grown more dignified. He wasn't just a dog, not anymore. He was a symbol. Children who passed him on hospital tours whispered, "That's him." Adults reached gently to touch his head like it was sacred. He now wore a special vest sewn with gold trim and an embroidered patch that read, "Canine Valor, Unit #1. Near the hospital's front garden, a new installation had been placed, a life-sized bronze statue of Rex, sitting at attention, ears perked, eyes alert. At its base, for those who guard without question. Marcus Thorne had overseen its unveiling. The young Marine had been reassigned to training, new K9 units, young handlers, and the next wave of partnerships between man and dog. He worked long days under the sun, sweat glistening on his freckled face, arms stronger now, jawline sharper. The sling was gone. The limp was fading. But the fire in his voice when he instructed trainees was unmistakable. "Trust is not taught," he would say. "It's earned. If you don't give everything to your dog, don't expect him to die for you." He came to visit Sarah weekly, usually late at night after the recruits had gone to bed. They'd sit on her porch, sip bad instant coffee, and talk about everything except the night that changed their lives. But sometimes, when the silence stretched long, they'd both look at Rex and fall quiet, understanding all that words could never capture. Today, though, Sarah was alone. After helping Alvarez steady her hands and walk her through the procedure, Sarah returned to her modest office on the second floor. It wasn't much, just a desk, a few chairs, a single window that looked over the helipad. But on the windowsill, someone had left a small ceramic figure, a hand-painted dog. She picked it up and turned it over. On the underside, in tiny black pen, "Thank you, room 12. She didn't know who that was. She didn't need to. Down the hall, Rex's nails clicked against the tile. He'd followed the scent, tracked her like always, and appeared at her door. Sarah opened it without looking. "Come in, soldier." He padded inside and sat by her feet. Together, in the heart of the hospital that once nearly broke them both, they stayed silent for a while. The world buzzed outside. Phones rang, machines beeped, people hurried to save lives. And Rex watched the door, ears still high, still guarding, still hers. The auditorium was larger than Sarah had imagined, its high vaulted ceiling laced with wooden beams that echoed every breath and rustle of movement. The room, nestled in the International Training Center for Humanitarian Medical Staff in Costa Rica, had been renovated recently, part of a sweeping initiative to build a global alliance of combat medics and frontline responders. Rows of dark mahogany chairs stretched into the distance, filled with uniforms of every shade, green, desert tan, navy, and white. And yet, the figure they'd come to see wasn't in uniform at all. Sarah Jenkins stood backstage, adjusting the collar of her dove-gray blouse. She was 6 months stronger now, slimmer but not fragile, her once severe cheekbones softened by recovery and resolve. Her brown hair had grown past her shoulders and now fell in gentle waves. There was still pain beneath her calm, especially on damp mornings or when climbing stairs, but it had become part of her, not the end of her. On the table beside her lay a leather folder. Inside it, her new code. She had rewritten the ethics handbook for the entire International Military Medical Coalition. Its title was unassuming, Field Compassion, prioritizing humanity in emergency response. But its message had already caused ripples across command structures in multiple countries. One line in particular had been quoted again and again. Human instinct to protect life precedes any procedural delay. In crisis, compassion is compliance. The doors opened again and in stepped Marcus Thorne, now more tan than pale, his uniform crisp and his steps confident. He had grown into his voice and his posture. His boyish awkwardness had been replaced by the stillness of a man who had fought for what mattered and refused to stand down. His arm had fully healed, though faint scars still marked the skin. Behind him came 5 new recruits, young, bright-eyed, chests puffed slightly with awe and pride. They followed Marcus like shadows, eyes wide as they took in the polished space. One of them, a woman with cropped blonde hair and a square jaw, nudged the one beside her and whispered, "Is that really her?" And ahead of them all padded Rex. He was slower now, his steps more deliberate. His fur had gone a touch grayer around the muzzle, and the dark markings on his legs had faded slightly. But his eyes, still sharp, still full of that tireless watchfulness that never rested. When he caught sight of Sarah, his tail thumped once, twice, then he barked, loud and firm. Sarah knelt. "You still remember me, huh?" she whispered. Rex leaned forward, rested his forehead against hers for a moment. Then the master of ceremonies called her name. As Sarah stepped onto the stage, applause rolled across the auditorium like thunder over mountains, 1,000 voices in unison, rising not just in honor, but in recognition. Many of those clapping had once served with her. Others had watched the footage. A few had once believed the headlines that painted her as reckless. They no longer did. Sarah walked slowly, deliberately, toward the center podium, Rex following beside her. When she turned to face the crowd, the applause fell to silence. She stood still for a moment, then placed her hand on Rex's head. "I was stabbed 7 times, she began, her voice calm and clear. "That much you've heard. But what you may not know is this. I didn't fall that night because I wasn't alone. I had someone by my side." Her fingers gently traced the edge of Rex's ear. He didn't ask for orders. He didn't check for protocols. He didn't wait for permission. He knew someone needed help, and he moved. A low murmur of agreement hummed through the crowd. "I was trained in emergency care. I was taught to stop bleeding, stabilize wounds, and administer aid. But what they didn't teach was what to do when your institution tells you to look the other way." She held up the revised ethics manual. "This is what we're teaching now, that the reflex to act, to protect, to defend the vulnerable, that is the protocol." A standing ovation began, first from the back rows, then sweeping forward like a wave. Officers stood, medics clapped, generals bowed their heads, and in the front row, the hospital director who had once signed her suspension order, now wearing a civilian suit and guilt in his eyes, stood too, clapping with everyone else. Rex didn't bark, he didn't move. He simply sat at attention, eyes scanning the room, always on watch, always aware. After the speech, Sarah stepped down into the crowd. Marcus approached her with a quiet smile. "You always know what to say." She nudged his arm. "You helped write that speech, remember?" "Doesn't mean I wasn't nervous." One of the new recruits, the blonde girl, stepped forward, clearing her throat. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you. You made me realize that I can do more than follow orders. I can protect people. That matters." Sarah nodded. "That's what we're here for." As the audience filed out, sunlight spilled through the high windows. Sarah remained behind, sitting on the edge of the stage. Rex lay beside her, head on his paws. "You're getting old, soldier," she whispered. Rex huffed quietly as if in protest. Yeah, she said, smiling. "But you've earned the right to rest." He didn't move, because his watch never ended. Sometimes God doesn't send angels with wings. Sometimes he sends them in the shape of a soldier with scars, a nurse with a trembling voice, or a loyal dog who never leaves your side. What happened to Sarah wasn't just a story of pain, it was a story of grace, of how faith is not always in churches or chapels, but in the eyes of those who stand watch when the world turns its back. Rex didn't speak, but through him, God answered. Through every bark, through every silent vigil outside her door, he reminded her, and us, that miracles don't always come with thunder. Sometimes they come on 4 paws. So, if you believe in second chances, in redemption, in love that endures, say a quiet prayer tonight for the heroes we don't always see, for the nurses who rise when others fall, for the dogs who guard more than just lives, but souls. And if this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment. Tell us what you believe loyalty means. Subscribe and tap the bell, because the next story might be the one your heart has been waiting for. Share this with someone who needs to believe again. May God bless you, and may you always have someone at your side who never stops watching.